This is Andy Tube, and this is part 14D of my little mini-series all about tension. And in this video, we're going to inspect all the tension parts that we took off the machine here. I want to see if there's any damage or any of them that need to be replaced just because they're worn out. So one of the first things that I'm the most interested in is the tension stud. And there's two reasons for that. The tension stud, it does take abuse from people. Usually what happens is this will tend to pinch down from people over tightening it, and also the threads will be stripped on this, or cross-threaded. In this case, to me, somebody's played around with it, and the reason I say that is the gap here through it doesn't look even. It should be even all the way, and it looks bigger up here. And the other thing is, if you look at the bottom half of that stud, it looks pretty flat and level. And if you look at the top part up here, it looks kind of flipped up or curved up at this end from right about here up. So I think somebody was fooling around and trying to adjust it, and this got spread open too much. And it's not unusual that it happens that when they get pinched down over the years at time, people will put stuff in here and try and pry them apart, and they'll get a bend in one of these spots right there where the metal is the thinnest, so it's going to give the most. And I think that's what's happened here. The other reason I'm very interested in this is because they're getting hard to find. I used to be able to buy them at So Classic, scw-classic.com, but Sue hasn't had them there for a few years now, so I'm assuming that she can't get them anymore. So and they're kind of hard to find, but I've bought a couple of spares from eBayers who, the tension is definitely messed up or rusty, so they sell it pretty cheap, the whole messed up thing. And the thing is, this is magnetized, and it doesn't. It's aluminum, so it doesn't rust. So I've done that, and you can still buy the 401A, 403, 404, 500A, and 503A. The whole tension unit's used anywhere from $15 to $25. So that's the reason I look at this. And this I think is spread, and that I'm confirming that because when I was taking it apart, the unscrewing the flange seemed too difficult. And see, I'm trying to put it back on here, and I'm having trouble getting it started because I think they're spread a little bit too far apart. So I don't want to force it and damage these threads in the flange or here. So I'm going to try and bend it back closer together. And normally I would not bend on the threaded part. I would come back in this area here where there are no threads and bend there. But I think somebody's already done that, And I need to go from about there out to here and bend just the last kind of third of this stud back down more even. The other way to check that gap is to take your indicator with that little bar in the center and just slide that in and on and see if it feels evenly. This is pretty good. This is pretty good. So I think it's just this tip here I gotta bring down a little bit. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to try to put some, let me come around this side. I'm going to try and put some cloth around that threads to protect them. But I want the tip to show because I've got to see how much I'm bending it. And then so that I don't flatten this part out too much, I want to hold my little screwdriver or something in there to brace it, because that is where I want it to bend, right where I'm putting that screwdriver. So that's the theory. And I've done this a few times, but I've never done it on camera, so hopefully it's making sense. But I'm gonna hold the screwdriver in there at the point I want that stud to bend, and I'm gonna protect it with cloth, and I'm just gonna gently, slowly close that gap a little bit. I think just a wee bit more. Let's see. Okay, it looks more level now, and the gap looks more even to me. Let's see if the indicator will still slide through there, because if that stud drags on that indicator bar, you're not going to get proper tension because the spring won't be able to move it right. So that feels good. That didn't bother. Let's see, putting this on now, if this will go any easier. Okay, I think that's an improvement for me. It feels like it goes on easier. So the next thing I want to do to test it is I'm going to put that indicator back on there and put the flange on to approximately the position it would be when it's assembled, and does that move freely. Yay! Okay, so that was a very minor repair. I actually think I could go a little bit more, but I'm not going to tempt fate. I don't want to damage the stud and have to try and replace it. So I'm happy with the stud, and the inside thread of the flange is good because it's going right on the stud. So I would test the outside thread, the thumb nut. I know it's got a big long name, but that will be screwing onto there later. Very easy, very nice. No problem whatsoever. Real good. It goes on and off very smoothly. So my flange is good, the thread's good, it's not bent, the threading's good inside and out. So I'll put it over here with the stud. There's my little tiny itty bitty set screw in there. Okay, I'm gonna take that out. Much as I hate to. I don't know if that's the residue of something it picked up. Huh. I'm going to get the de-ruster. I'm going to get my rust remover. Okay, sorry about that. I went and got the rust remover I use. Cutter the must for rust. You saw that when I was cleaning some of the small parts, I think. So I put a little tiny bit in my little plastic cup. I'm just going to drop the screw in there, let it soak for a moment, and I'm going to take an interdental, not one that I use for oil, or one that's clean, doesn't have anything else on it, and I'm just going to run that through. It must be some little flash rust or something. I don't know what's up with that. Yeah, it looks like it's coming right off. I don't know if that was rust, but I'm not going to take a chance, especially on that little bitty screw. Can you imagine trying to find a set screw like that? Sheesh. I mentioned in my videos that all the screws from Singer were proprietary, meaning like the size and the thread count was not standard. So I've tried, but I have never been able to go into a hardware store and say, hey, I need a screw like this, and get one. Never. So that looks clean now, and I just wiped off the residue, and I can leave that must for rust on there, and it can help protect for rust up to a year. So I'm not worried about that now. But let's see if I can fish out this little tiny set screw there. A little more light on it there. Can you see it there? Eesh. But it's clean and shiny now. So whatever I did, and I was storing those parts in a bag. I don't know if there was moisture in there or something else, but I've got that cleaned up now. So I'm going to put it over here with my good parts. And look what I found at the dollar store the other day. It's a smaller version of my smaller version of my little magnetized steel tray. So it's a good place to put that little tiny guy in there, so you won't get lost. Okay, so here's my good parts. Let's see. I mentioned this tension indicator, and the metal ones, I only have found one broken over the years, where this center part that the tension pin pushes against has actually been cracked and not usable. So the newer machines where these are plastic, I've seen dozens that part is ruined, and you can buy the replacement plastic parts in a few places. I think the last time I got one, So Classic had, and you can buy a whole new tension unit for $15, but it's plastic. But if you just need it to sew, but the metal ones are usually pretty good. But you definitely want to check, because if that's cracked and that tension pin just flops around there at the end and cannot push back on the tension spring, you're going to have to replace it. Okay, that's with my good stuff. And speaking of the tension spring, this is one of the very few parts on the tension unit that I put oil on, because I have pulled these out of the machine where they've been rusty, and there usually was a lot of very fine thread lint. And I know from using compressed air, canned air in my career, that, and you can see it yourself, just go spray it on a mirror or something and you'll see condensation. And that condensation gets on those little thread particles and packs it into places, and that thread particles and lint hold the moisture and you get rust. So I just take my oil brush and I'll give that a nice coating. And even though I inspected this pretty good when I took it off, let's talk about it again for a moment. So, called the tension spring, beehive spring. Sometimes I've heard it as the pyramid spring, but you can see that the last coil in the front only goes around halfway and then makes a 90-degree turn and turns right through the center. So you want to make sure that piece has not broken off. That's usually where I found it broken off, is right where it turns the corner. And the other place is back here, about a ½ inch or so back from this end. And I don't know if gets pinched or what, but this one looks great. And you can buy these online too. I think I go to So Classic for that too. I usually go there a few times a year and buy rubber feet and tension springs and stuff, and get enough to where I save money on shipping, or some of these parts, like the more you buy, she starts dropping the price, But this is good. It's got a little light coating of oil to help protect it from rust over the next few years. So that goes in my good pile. The take-up spring, thread take-up spring, that's important. I want to see if that is damaged or bent. And this looks pretty good. Everything looks even. It doesn't look malformed. When I hold it by the loop, I call it, I look at the coils here to see if they're nice and even and they're not like stretched out. Nothing's bent. Looks good. And then one of the problem areas can be on this if this last coil is bent in and folded back. And if that is broken off, you're not going to get tension or good tension, because that tail, I call it the spring tail, when this goes on there, that tail rides in one of these kind of gear slots, and you adjust it, you adjust it a certain way on the machine, which I'll be showing later. But when it's mounted into the machine, that little tail in there holds the end of the spring, and that's what allows tension on it. That's what allows the spring to coil and uncoil. Every stitch you sew, it's going like that, up and down. So here I'll move it out of the way there, and you see that there's no tension. So you gotta look for that. This is a brand new one that I bought from So Classic. I bought 5 or 10 of them at a time, and I keep one handy in my tool area on my desk, because if I have any doubt, I'll do a side-by-side comparison. The new ones here, like if I buy them, I think 5 at a time, I get them for $1.60 or something. But for a couple $3, you could just put a brand new one, right? So why bother with the old? Toss it. But I will say that the newer ones are a heavier gauge, and I don't know that they're really made for the 300, 400, 500 series of Singer. But they work, but your tension is going to change if you use the new spring. And you're going to have to adjust it, which when you take it apart you got to adjust it anyway. But I know it's hard to tell on this video, but the gauge of the spring wire is a little bit heavier, so just expect that. So if my old one is good, and when I install it, if it works if it works properly, I'm going to keep it. And a lot of times I'll do that, and then I'll just give a brand new one in the bag to the customer, and and say that's the original spring, it's working great, but here's a brand new one, so if it ever fails, you've already got one. So most of them think that's real good. I've had a couple that say, hey, just put the brand new one on, and I do, and then I give them the old one for a backup. So good enough. But I'm going to plan on using it, and I'll find out just how good it is when I go to set the stroke and so forth. I got my 3 tension discs, and I cleaned all these parts, and boy, they were fine. They were nice. They cleaned up nice. So if you find any rust or anything, use a little bit of the rust remover. It doesn't take long. And this, you don't want to get oil or cleaning residue. When they're on the machine, I've cleaned them with alcohol usually, because look, these 3 discs, whether you single needle or 2 needle sew, the thread's going to be between 2 of these, and that spring putting tension on it is what does your upper tension. So you want them to be clean, but you want them to be dry and without any kind of Windex or crud cutter or oil, for sure. So these are good. They're going over into my good pile. Let's do the thread take-up spring thread guard. That goes on after the disc, and it's usually fine. But what to look for is, see, if you look on the edge of it there, it's nice and flat. What to look for is if it's been bent or warped. And the other thing is the pin that pushes into a hole on the front of the sewing machine to hold it in place, and that often can be bent. It can be, I've had machines where it's missing, I've had where it's bent, and I've had it's bent to the side. Wow, I mean, it just totally bent. It won't even go in the hole anymore. So this one looks good. And I put it on a flat surface like the bed of the machine, and I check it. Doesn't wobble around. I look at the post. It's coming off at a 90 degree from the round part. No rust. Looks good. So we're good with that. Look at that. There's the tension releasing pin that goes inside the hole that's down the center of the tension stud. It's got that little flattened out part on the end, and I meant to measure that. I forgot, but here's my measure. Because sometimes this is gone from the machine. It's never broken, but it's gone. And I figured somebody took parts and didn't know what it was and lost track of it. But see if I can line it. It seems like it's 1 3/16, but let me measure that real good. Yeah, it's 1 3/16, tip to tip. So I've had to make a few of these over the years because they were missing from the machines that I bought. So I take the tension stud, to my junk drawer or to the hardware store, and I get a finishing nail that goes in there, like that, so I know it fits. And I'll get one about 1.5 inches long and come home, measure it, and cut it, and take a flat chisel and pound that down. My wife makes some jewelry. She's got a little mini vise, and I've put it in there before and flattened it in a little mini vise. And I guess technically you could put a smooth end, but get one longer than you need, because you're going to have to cut off the head of the finishing nail and the point, and then like put it on some sandpaper or nail file and smooth it out. I always try and put a little bit of a flange on there so it spreads the pressure, but I suppose you could just kind of round off the edges a little bit. But your final length is 1 3/16 for these 400 and 500 Slantomatics. I don't know about others. It's like that. So my pin is good. My pin's good. We're going to use that. It's like this take-up spring. This I've used this same one on all of the 401, 403, 404, 500, 503. I think it might have even gone on my wife's 301A. So, but just put in your model number when you want to buy it, and make sure that the seller guarantees it. And you got your old one, you can compare it to the new one. So, okay, let's move along here, and let's take a look at that tension indicator flange. Now, this is the one with the numbers 0 through 9, and you just want to be sure it's not bent, damaged. If you're doing a 401A, you'll see holes in this. And some of the other 404s, like this 404 has the holes, but I've done 404s where this is a little bit different. It doesn't have these little bitty holes, and I'll explain why when we're putting it back together. But just that you got the numbers, and then let me set this up, because I want to show you one more thing inside of this that's real important. Okay, had to move over behind the camera so I could be sure this shows up. And there's a little notch in all of these. All the ones I've ever done, they have a notch, and the notch is at the 0, or it's like behind the 0. And that notch is to match up with the pin and stuff, and I'll be showing that later. But you want to make sure that notch is not damaged or broken off, no matter what Singer you're doing. I don't know the other brands. So even if you're working on a 600-700 or later, if it's got a tension unit like this on the outside, and it's got that 0 through 9 plate, it most likely has to have a little notch there. but definitely on the 404. So you want to inspect for that. And this is good. This is good. It's same kind of thing. Check it on a flatbed. It's not warped. It's not dented. It's not bent. So it's good to go. And you remember the longest set screw, right? On the machine, that one that goes in the face of the machine to hold the tension stud in place. Very seldom anything wrong with this other than a little bit of rust. You know, I've never pulled one out that's bent up or broken, or some of them, you know, the end is partially ruined by somebody using the wrong size screwdriver and stuff. But you shouldn't have any problem with this. And this is one of the other few parts that I do put a little oil, because it's just not that highly polished steel, and I don't want it to get rusty over time. I mean, I'm in Arizona, so, and I've seen rusty heads on these. So those of you that live in more humid climate, which would be just about any place else in the United States, I think. So anyway, I put a little bit of oil on that. So this is the cap, if you remember, the nice, pretty, polished, chromed cap that goes on the end of everything. That little tiny set screw holds it in place. And I've never had a problem with the cap. It's real sturdy and the chrome is good. But just inspect it and make sure it's flat. Put it on a flat surface. Even if this is warped a little bit, it'll work fine. But I doubt if you're ever going to have a problem with this. Let me put it that way. So put that with the good stuff. And what's that? The tension indicator flange stop washer. And I call it pin, but it's a washer. Okay. And this is good. Put a little oil on this piece. What you got to watch for here is if that center bar that slides onto the stud is bent, broken, or missing, and the pin that sticks up on the top on the 401s, it seems like they're curved. It's like a little crooked finger. And on the 403 or 404, that pin is straight. And this is a straight pin. The ones that were curved are meant to go, and I know the 301 is, they're meant to go and do micro adjustments of the tension in those little holes. And I've even had people get the fingered one to put on their 404, or change the whole unit from the 404 tension to the 401A to get those little micro tension adjustments. And if you're here with a 401A or one with a fingered washer, when I do the install and adjusting, I'll explain that part of it. And it's the same for the 301A. But the washer is good. I've got the two kind of associated parts now. The thread guide upper, which is the what I think of as the tall vertical thread guide, and not bent, not rusted, not damaged. Now I have had a couple where this loop right here of the thread guide has been smashed in and pushed into the machine and kind of flattened, and I couldn't get the thread around it. I couldn't snap in the thread when I was threading the needle. But I was able to just gently pry it out and reshape it a little bit with a needle nose. So it's rare that that has any damage. And this one is fine. This one's in great shape. So with the rest of my good parts. And this last piece, what I call the horizontal piece that goes there, is the slack thread guide regulator and tension thread guide. And it's the same thing. You want to look for rust or any damage onto it. I might give that a dip right there. Looks like a little spot of rust. They all cleaned up good with the crud cutter. I got a little bit of this, and it got most of the grime and stuff off like that. So you just want to see if it's bent. Sometimes this is the little stop or rest for the check spring, and I've had it where that's been misshapen or flattened a little bit. But again, it's kind of rare that these parts are going to have any damage. Yeah, I think that was just a little flash rust. I'm very happy with that crud cutter, a Must for Rust product, but that is the only rust remover that I've ever used. So I don't really know how it compares to others, but I never went looking for others. All right. Add that to my pile. Now I've got one little piece left, and that's one of those. That's how those two pieces I just showed you screw on to the machine, and no rust. This one's usually pretty good. Even the slot usually isn't misshapen. It's a pretty hard steel screw, so it's good. I think all my parts are good here, good to go. Let's see. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention, where is that? On the tension releasing pin, and I talked about how you could buy like a finishing nail or something like that and cut it down to size and make your own. I just do want to mention, if you do that, try and get a stainless steel. Whether you can find a pin or a rod or a nail, if you can find a stainless steel, it's going to last a lot longer, and it'll be a little harder for your machine. Okay, so that's a run through of all these parts. I get them all back in my little bowl here so I don't lose them. I thank you for tuning in to this video, and the next video. Oh, and don't forget my little tiny guy. In the next video, we're gonna put this all back together. So what we got to do is turn that into this. That's what it looks like, all assembled. The tension assembly itself, minus the thread guards and the set screw. But who'd have thought all that would compact down into this? But we'll do it, and you'll find out that it's not hard, it's not any big deal. And you're going to learn a lot more if you keep watching the little mini-series all about tension. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.